Then the Venerable Upavana went to the Buddha and said to him, Bhante, it is said that the Dhamma is evident. In what way is the Dhamma evident, not involving time, verifiable, and ushering, to be experienced by the wise for themselves? Upavana, take a bhikkhu who sees a sight with the eye. He feels both the sight and passion for the sight. There being passion for sights internally, he understands, there is passion for sights internally for me. This is how the Dhamma is evident, not involving time, verifiable, and ushering, to be experienced by the wise for themselves. So on with hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and cognizing. Now take a bhikkhu who sees a sight with the eye. He feels the sight, but no passion for the sight. There being no passion for the sights internally, he understands, there is no passion for sights internally for me. That is how the Dhamma is evident, not involving time, verifiable, and ushering, to be experienced by the wise for themselves. So on.
So which number was that?
This was Samyutta Nikaya 3570.
So usually it's thought of that you abandon defilements kind of like later. You have something in your mind, something that you're revolving around, and then you sort of do something so that at some undefined period of time later, that thing goes away. And that's how purification is conceived. So inherently that involves time. But here the Buddha is saying the Dhamma doesn't involve time. And he's talking about something that might easily be overlooked, because it says passion for sights internally. It doesn't just say passion for sights. So what could we come up with as a practical description of what the sutta just said?
Well, what comes to mind for me first is it's kind of taking away your excuses, in the sense of, you might say, oh, well, sure, right now I am it's just I'm passionate, I haven't gotten there yet. But this is kind of saying, no, there is something that is within your control that you're doing right here, right now, that can be stopped. So it kind of takes away the room for that excuse. But again, it's kind of comes down to figuring out what is within your control and what's not.
So what is that passion internally? Like, you already kind of hinted at it, but is it something that comes by itself?
Well, no, it's something you're doing. It's an action.
So does it mean that if you just stop doing something, it will disappear immediately?
Well, you have to kind of be able to distinguish between passion and feeling, is what that sutta was talking about.
Yeah, so in a sense it doesn't, it's not that fully it's just you doing it. Because then you might think, okay, so I just have to find the perfect trick for it to cease immediately, and then you're going to basically just frustrate yourself trying to find out what the missing sort of eureka moment is. But in a sense it does come by itself. Like feeling, as the Buddha said, the underlying tendencies are beginningless. So you don't need to start trying to be lustful, start trying to be averse, start trying to be ignorant. It's enough from the starting point that we all begin in to have a pleasant feeling. That's enough for lust to be there. Having an unpleasant feeling, enough for aversion to be there. Having a neutral feeling, enough for distraction, carelessness to be there. So it does come by itself in the sense that you didn't, it's not a choice that you consciously made. But at the same time, it is, you are responsible for it, because it's something that, like, there is a choice you're making.
That is maintaining it. That's
Yeah. There's a choice you're making that's maintaining it, and that if you stop making it, you would actually fix the problem, even though the symptoms are still there. And that's where the tough, the tricky part comes in, because the natural expectation is, I want the whole thing to disappear. And you feel usually a sense of guilt, like because you did something and these thoughts are now coming up. And you implicitly feel that sense of like, okay, I created this, now I have to get rid of it as soon as possible. And the point there is that the passion internally, like you basically disregard any explanation involving time of why this passion came to be. It doesn't matter if genuinely you did something unwholesome, something happened, something unexpected. Right now, if you allow yourself to act out of craving in regard to that passion, either to continue indulging in it or trying to get rid of it, that is your passion now. Like the other stuff that's there on its own, the pressure, the feelings, the thoughts, that's not in your control. Back then, sure, you could have prevented it if you hadn't been careless, but you can't undo what you did in the past. So now this is the state of your aggregates, and what you're doing now internally is as simple as just giving into it or trying to get rid of it. It's that tiny little choice to lean in either of those two directions. So, and that's the part that because yes, there is calm. The sutras talked about the mind calming down and samadhi and all that stuff, but none of that is permanent. Like the thing is, you are going to have these pressuring states sooner or later, and when stuff happens in life, and if you think that only when these things don't arise your practice is going well, inevitably your practice is going to fail at some point from that perspective. So you need to basically recognize that absence of craving and a calm mind are two different things. And wholesomeness, the wholesomeness that you need to worry about, is the absence of craving. Calm mind comes as a result of the absence of craving. So if right now you have a whatever it might be, whatever hindrance, whatever pressure it might be, now you make a choice not to act out of craving in regard to it, but truly, like you, again, not involving time. You're not like expecting, because that's a problem. Usually you say, okay, I'm going to endure this, I'm not going to act out of it, but why? Because you still, like, if you ask yourself what's going to happen, how would I feel if tomorrow it's still there? It's clear that you would be bothered. So you need to undo that expectation and just endure it basically for its own sake. And then that's where, on that internal level, you don't have craving. And then the problem is fixed. Like I said, the illness, the actual illness is fixed, but the symptoms are still there. And if you keep the illness out of the picture for a sufficient amount of time, then the symptoms will go away as well. But that shouldn't really be your concern. Like as long as you're still concerned of when will the symptoms go away, you won't be able to undo the illness properly.
That's one of the things I was thinking when you mentioned this topic, to bring up, like, how does it actually relate to, I suppose, the correct understanding of, when it's talked about, like, the centrality of patience and endurance, and all of those things have this immediate implication of involving time. Okay, patience, I must be patient, patiently endure this, pressure, and not be kind of in a rush to, like, immediately see it or fix it right away. And so there is a kind of correctness in that, but then it also kind of gets this implication of, so I must patiently wait
So that
for the craving to kind of go away on its
Yeah.
own somewhere over there. So like, what would be the correct, how do they actually go together then?
be patient so that ...
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so how can you be patient without
Involving time.
By allowing to manifest whatever has to manifest and basically not act out of it. That will be your level of patientness or impatientness.
And obviously, like, the thing is, you're going to have that information in your mind. You're going to know, yes, I shouldn't act out of it. But even that will not be enough. Like, you will need to keep yourself in check, because at some point, like I said, the underlying tendencies are like just waiting to jump in. And most especially if you haven't been developing the prerequisites of virtue, sense restraint, seclusion, like, the wrong attitude is going to come back, and you're going to notice like 2 months later, if ever. So that's why those prerequisites are not optional, because those are the things that allow you to at least contain how far you can, how far you will go in either of these two wrong directions of overly giving in or trying to get rid of stuff. Because that's what happens when you break your restraint and stuff. The natural result is the sense of guilt, like I just said. And then because of that, like, you can't help it. That whole push is there for you to resolve the situation as quickly as possible, and that undermines your ability to be truly patient on that right level. So that's why that's like the result of action in a more the most acute way, not like, what's going to happen in your next life. In this very life, you end up having to deal with these mental states that you yourself are not able to properly endure and understand, on account of you doing stuff that you knew was unwholesome from the start. And that's why it's a gradual training. Like, that's why the Buddha would start by telling the person, okay, develop your virtue. Once the virtue is developed, he would move on to the next one. And then once that's developed, he would move on to the next one. So if you've been, let's say, breaking precepts, and then you catch yourself, what would be how you practice that timeless patience, if you want to call it that?
Well, acutely, you don't want to try to get rid of the guilt. Like, you don't want to now be kind of perpetuating the same thing that you've been doing when you were breaking the precepts, just now applied to the guilt of breaking the precepts. So, I mean, often you can kind of say you're being indulgent, and then you can kind of swing the other way. Like, oh, I need to like kind of double down, punish myself for this. It is just like, you don't want the guilt to be there.
But what would be the best way to just actually fix the problem and not introduce other variables that are going to distract you? Let's say you're feeling pressure to keep breaking the precepts, and not just like you're still at the stage where you haven't established your virtue. Let's say, like, you still genuinely feel almost like automatically you end up doing these things.
Well, you need to reflect on kind of the benefit of following the precepts while that pressure is not there. But that's okay. I said a while.
Yeah,
so it's still kind of saying later.
Well, let's say, like, right now you I don't know, you broke a precept 2 days ago or something, and you're still feeling the pressure. You're basically kind of feeling totally confused. I feel like I am compelled to keep doing this, and it's a pressure. At the same time, I know I shouldn't be. So I know I shouldn't, but at the same time it's like pressuring me, and at the same time I'm feeling guilty.
So let's
That's
say
kind of too confused.
let's say it's not like you already restrained yourself. It is like you are about to actually give in. Like, so we're not talking about someone who would be like withdrawing and then reflecting like, okay, I shouldn't have done that. No, there's like someone who is about to just a total beginner, hasn't been keeping any sort of behavior, good behavior in their life, and they genuinely feel like one slip and they're back into lying, killing, whatever. The answer is quite simple, actually.
Is it just don't?
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All you can do is not do it.
Right.
So at that stage, like, you have to, the defilement that was there is destroyed the moment you just don't do it. So the problem is, like, you might, like you said, you might be thinking, okay, so now I have to get rid of the guilt and or do something more than this, basically. And that's what would actually distract you from the fact that, no, the pressure that I have right now is to break the precept. And if at the same time with that pressure I have the patience in regard to it, it cancels out. So you balance it out to the same extent that it's there, and then only later, when you don't no longer feel pressure to break these precepts, and you feel like, okay, now it's other stuff that my mind is revolving around, like just thoughts, but not really the actual actions out there in the world, then you realize over time, okay, now there is a more subtle layer here that I can deal with. And in the same way that you would simply refrain from killing an insect, you can now refrain from giving into thoughts of sensuality, aversion, and distraction. So that's why it's like the Buddha gave a simile of a gradually purifying gold. And he said it starts with the unwholesome actions by body, speech, and mind, which is like, when the gold is just freshly taken out of the mine or whatever. And then gradually you get it to the point where it's just gold dust, and then it's ready to be turned into like a bracelet or something. So you can't be doing the melting when there is still gravel and dirt in the gold. So that's why it's like the Buddha wouldn't be talking to people about, yeah, so 2 years from now, when you have developed your virtue and your sense restraint, you're going to be doing this and this. It's like precisely right now you develop that timeless principle, starting with your virtue. You're not waiting for something else to happen in order for you to be able to keep the precepts. You realize right now, at this moment, there is an opportunity to break this precept, and at the same time there is a choice to not do it. And that's already developing the principle of Paticca with this decision.
Yeah, and like the also important point there is like the refraining from doing it. What that is kind of opening up is the recognition that there is that it is a choice to break the precept, because breaking any precept or acting out of any pressure, what that has in common in whatever kind of situation is that it feels like a compulsion, feels like I'm under a kind of a compulsion. I must do this. And then the problem that can also happen is that you probably would initially then just be kind of replacing it with another sort of, okay, I must just sort of not do this, I must sort of do something else. But if you just kind of don't allow this one to happen to that extent, it's already kind of just cancelling out that layer of the defilement that was causing you to do it. So allowing you to kind of remove that layer, that you get to kind of see another one, and that kind of carries all the way through, because ultimately what you can kind of realize is like that sort of sense of like I'm under pressure to I must tell a lie in this situation. I can't, this person just can't know the truth or whatever. And what you can ultimately realize is like it is that it's your craving and nothing else that is the source of that kind of compulsion. And if you were to be able to stop craving in that situation, to stop kind of resisting the unpleasantness of the idea of this person knowing the truth or whatever, you would have literally no reason. There would be no reason to need to tell a lie. You would just be you'd be free, basically.
But at that layer, what would be the most acute way of not resisting the prospect of telling the truth?
What would be the most acute way of not resisting
the prospect of telling the truth?
Well, exactly, like recognizing the unpleasantness of the idea of it, in the idea of and basically and being patient in regard to it.
Yeah, well, that would be a more subtle recognition. Like, at that point, the most acute way to not resist would be to simply just
to not do it. That's kind of what I meant. I mean, and that you can carry that principle up all the way through. But at that point, like if somebody really is feeling that compulsion, you're not going to recognize
exactly.
it.
So because all of these feelings and like the hindrances and all that stuff would become apparent once you have not been constricted.
Yes.
On that level.
Yeah. So that's what I meant. Like it's all, but it is still following the same principle. It's just like not perpetuating that level of it is making these subtler levels clear. From that point of view.
If you're in the habit of lying habitually, you're not going to see the pressure to lie. You're not going to see the mental kind of
you'll start
background
feeling. That's
to
the point.
it.
You'll start feeling the pressure of it once you decide to not do it.
Right. Yeah. So it shows you that's kind of why speech needs to be before, like you need to purify your speech before you can purify the mind. Just because, I mean, that's kind of the layering there.
Yeah, right? and you the important point is you have to find, and it could take some investigation, like what stage or what layer are you actually in? So what is the thing that you slip on or in regard to? And then you see that's the stuff you need to worry about. Like at the level of a person who isn't able to keep the precepts, if they start worrying about not resisting the feeling and then that's going to be actually distracting them from what they actually can do right now and factually like cut off an entire, like without remainder, that layer is cut off. That layer of defilement is cut off. So the noticing what is the actual compulsion here, you might be, the opposite principle applies as well. If you, let's say, underestimate the subtlety of the compulsion and you think it's just about dealing with the actions, whereas really the stuff that's propelling you there is your mental craving now to overly resolve the situation, whereas you're already restrained, but you're kind of like flogging a dead horse because you want to now, like, I don't want to feel the pressure to do these actions anymore even. And that's where you would be overstepping the mark and not seeing that actually now you should be working on a more subtle level of not now on this mental level revolving around that restlessness. So
yeah, that's wherever there's pressure, essentially, to act.
So it's that internal, you could say that internal passion that the sutta talks about. You could measure that by saying, not like what do I feel or what is there, but do I want to act? Is there a plan? Do I have intentions to act out of this in the future? If that's not there, that's not an internal passion that you have at that moment. So it's just basically a feeling. If truly there is no plan to give into it, no matter how big the wave is, if there's no plan to, jump into the ocean or run away, then that isn't, there's no problem there anymore. And but the problem would be sustaining that, because it's so easy to just fall into one of the other extremes, because again, that's the natural tendency. So then the other thing I wanted to mention, so that's already sort of brought up for a second, but the Paticcasamuppada, or dependent origination, is usually thought of as this sequence of cause and effect, and that's actually quite obscuring. That view is obscuring this responsibility that we're talking about, the sense of not just responsibility in a bad sense, but in a good sense as well. Because if you don't recognize actually it's on you, well, that does make the practice a lot more frustrating than it should be. So the it's not a cause and effect in the sense that I did something in the past and now this craving is like has to be here because I did something in the past. That's a wrong view. The craving is there if there is ignorance now, and you have a say in that. Like you can first of all recognize yourself acting out, and then restrain those activities that you're doing on purpose. Well, not on purpose. Let's say it does involve intention. It never happens by accident. So Paticcasamuppada really should be understood. It is the epitome of that timeless nature, in the sense that craving is there not because craving has to be there. Craving is there because of ignorance.
Which means it's like, I mean, practically speaking, you could say it's there when it's not known.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's it.
You could say craving is there when craving is not known, or craving is there when feeling is not known, or craving is there when form is not known. Any of these aspects you could take. So basically, like if you think, okay, I'm supposed to resolve this somehow, that will prevent you from seeing Paticcasamuppada. It's not supposed to resolve it. You're supposed to see what this is. And then you basically suspend your preconceived notions of like how much of it should be there and how much of it shouldn't be there. No, what matters is I sustain the perspective that with this is. Like with this body that's here, subject to aging, sickness, death. While that is there, these thoughts are happening. Then and if you maintain that sort of two sides of the coin, and you don't fall away from it, you absolutely don't need to worry about like, you know, how much thinking is too much thinking, or you know, how long will this last. It doesn't matter anymore. What matters is to sustain that perspective.
And this would be going against the stream.
Yeah. That is the only really thing that you can do to prevent yourself from acting out in the future, is like right now, the stuff that's pressuring you to act, don't do it. Not like, you know, rearrange the circumstances so that in the future, you know, when it comes up, you have like the perfect plan to deal with it. That's not how it works. It's right now, when you have the inclination to act out of something seemingly unrelated. Like, you know, the problem is that you tend to give in to lying, as we said, and then now you have the compulsion to, you know, I don't know, go and watch TV when it's currently rooted in distraction, and it's seemingly unrelated. You would think, well, you know, if I just come up with the perfect sort of psychotherapeutic step-by-step plan to never lie, that's how I won't. But no, you stop doing these things by ceasing to act out of pressure in general, because that's another thing. Craving is defined in the suttas, like we tend to assume that craving is some specific, I would say I'm craving for this, but actually the way craving is defined in the suttas is like the craving that leads to repeated being, delighting here and there, or now here and now there, meaning it's never about the specific thing. It's just a very general tendency to lean in either towards or against. So it literally doesn't matter whether it's towards lying, whether it's towards sensuality, whether it's towards acting out of aversion, all of that is exactly the same craving. And that's why you will see, like if you're acting out of sensuality for a while, you've been proliferating that, and then something comes up that before wouldn't have irritated you as much, now it's going to irritate you, because it's the same craving that's growing, even though the content of the defilements, so to speak, is different. So it's fundamentally it has to start with body and speech, like restraining these things. Practically, you will be much closer to really seeing Paticcasamuppada by restraining yourself in that way. Again, by seeing that the choice, recognizing this is a choice that I can simply not make. That's much closer to seeing Paticcasamuppada than just writing these charts that people like to fiddle around with and all that.
I wanted to say, I think it's that point is quite important though, because it can easily, I just want to emphasize it because it might be easy to overlook, and it is something that can kind of get in the way. The fact that it's really just like, the way to do it correctly is to simply not do it without making that into something else that you're now like doing, or kind of thinking that in order to not do things, like, because that's quite a common thing as well, or something that I used to think, like, in order to not do these things, I must, I don't know, practice a specific type of mindfulness, or be very aware of like every bodily action, or have a sort of a practice that will allow me to not do these things. No, it's literally just on the level of when there's pressure, I don't act out of it, to the extent I'm able to see the pressure, and to the extent I'm able to kind of reveal my responsibility in it. So like, if I can see, okay, there is a pressure to, even just on the level of breaking the precepts, but I've decided I'm not going to break the precepts, and I'm pressured to break them, but I'm not going to do it. So to that extent, I can see I have a choice, and that's it. Like, I leave it there, and I'm not kind of building anything else on top of it, or doing anything, or seeing it as another kind of
turning that into a new activity.
A new activity, yeah. And that's where it can often, because that is exactly the pressure. It's to make this into a new thing to rely on.
And why would you do that?
Out of pressure, out of craving.
Yeah, because basically, like, the thing is, you're still not taking responsibility. When that happens, is like, you're basically implicitly, you're not telling that to yourself, but the idea is, no, I have the intention to act because this thing is here. And therefore, I need to get rid of it so that I won't act out. But no, it's you choose to act out. It doesn't matter how like, even if it's like right flying in front of your eyes, it's you who chooses to give into it every single time. So then,
and that's the same, and that would be then the same reason that you would be failing to, that would prevent you, no matter how far you take that. It's that same reason that would prevent you from seeing your own craving, because that is exactly the principle of, that's why you don't see cravings, because I want this because of this, or like because of the attention being focused on
it's the thing's problem.
Yeah, it's the thing's problem, on whatever subtle or coarse layer.
Yeah, that's actually one of the reasons why, even though many people can keep the precepts and be quite wholesome in their outward behavior, but because they never took the responsibility for that virtue, in the sense that the problem is not it doesn't have anything to do with these things arising. The problem is me acting out of them. Then, like, you're keeping the virtue, but with this background view of, like you said, I need to find all these practices now that are going to deal with this, so that I don't have to actually restrain myself. That's what you're saying, basically. So even though you might have practiced virtue for 50 years, in that way, it didn't actually develop. Well, certainly it did develop your mind to some extent, but basically, like, you basically stopped there. You wouldn't have been able to go into any deeper layers of actual mind development, which is nothing other than, as I said before, the same way you just don't tell a lie, you just don't engage in sexual intercourse. Well, now you just don't give in to sensuality, ill will, indolence and lethargy, restlessness and anxiety and doubt. You just don't give into the 5 hindrances, and just not giving into the 5 hindrances is the pleasure of the first jhana. You don't need to wait, like, okay, so I do this practice and then this sort of magical state arises where I'm not secluded, now I'm secluded from the hindrances. It's, you develop it by understanding what it is and understanding that extent to which the thing is there, but at the same time, while it's there, I'm refusing to give into it, either just through a pure determination or indirectly by recognizing a context that is there at the same time with the presence of this thing. And that's the 4 satipatthana is supposed to achieve.
And that would be the correct, this thing is there, I'm refusing to give into it. That's that patience which, like, if developed to, it's not about waiting, patiently waiting for, for the thing to stop pressuring you. It's like, this thing is there, I'm refusing to give into it. Develop that to a sufficient extent so that just the fact that this thing is there in and of itself will be enough to be free from the pressure in regard to it. Like,
just knowing
the fact that this is there without, having basically developed the patience to an infinite extent would be, I suppose, like, one of the ways that you could then describe, well, whatever, it's subject to manifestation, all it can do is manifest and cease, and that's enough to be free from any pressure in regard to it.
It's because that's the thing. If you expect then that the understanding will come on that level of some magical revelations and visions and stuff, that comes up when you finally got rid of the pressure. That's not actually teaching you how to deal or how to, survive, let's say, in the midst of what your senses actually are in times when they go back to their usual state, which is inevitable. Even the suttas say, like, if an arahant gets too distracted with fame, honor, possessions, and that sort of thing, they will lose their samadhi. So their senses will go back to their natural state. But that unshakable liberation of mind, as it's described in the suttas, which is like that recognition that no matter how loud this gets, how pressuring this gets, I always have the choice, even if it's just a tiny millimeter or nanometer of space, to remain completely uninvolved with it. And that starts with, like, you try to figure that out abstractly, it's not going to work. It's you start to see it for yourself factually, just by keeping the precepts. Like the suttas would say, somebody who develops precepts, they would have this what's it called, unblemished joy internally. So it's not a joy of some other sort of massage that came over you out of nowhere. It's the joy of seeing, no, wait, this stuff that I previously felt was being imposed on me actually wasn't. It was entirely I was basically torturing myself by giving into this stuff. And now you see that, and now you see it can't come in by itself. Like, you are the one who ushers it in. So that gives rise to the type of peace that actually develops you so that in the future you won't be falling for that trap again. Not like temporarily you went into a different dimension and now you come back and the same problem is there, which is what usually happens. So the whole Patisampada thing, it shouldn't be viewed as a sequence neither in multiple lives nor in a span of 5 seconds. It's everything, all of that is just happening at the same time, and you can't sort of put yourself outside of that structure, like observe it from the outside. Let's say you are always the one who is, like, you exist to the extent that structure is there. That's basically it. So anything you do, you think you're watching your consciousness passing like this, all of that is already within ignorance, already within sankharas already within namarupa, so it's just like proliferating further while the actual stuff is happening there behind you, so to say. So by cultivating this on whichever level the person is at the moment, like that they've been able to remain stable in, then that's the it's the same training all along. It's just the same principle developed on more and more subtle layers, and the that's why in the suttas you would sometimes find not necessarily like concrete meditation objects, so to say. It would just say, oh, develop the perception of abandonment, develop non-delight in the whole world, develop in some suttas it would say like, just develop the effort that you will not give into unwholesome states, because it's never about some object that will later in time give you a vacation from this. It's about the objects, quote unquote, that the suttas give are all for that same purpose of maintaining perspective to the extent that you won't act out while that thing is there. But all of these satipatthanas and stuff, that's exclusively for the mental level, really. Like once your body and speech are fully restrained, and now your mind is the one that's kind of like going too far in either direction, let's say. Now that's when the satipatthanas come in. Like that's going to help you keep perspective in the face of your own thinking, not to get rid of it, but to see for what it is. And that's the first jhana. Thinking and pondering is still there, but that unshakable perspective that prevents you from falling into it, let's say, while it's happening. So yeah, then it goes further into second jhana, third jhana, but it's always the same principle. So and that's why it wouldn't either be a matter of you sort of committing to the practice of satipatthana for a certain amount of time, period of time, so that then this result comes of the peace or whatever. If you have that view, you still haven't understood what that right endurance is. It's like, no, right now, all that matters is that right now I am not acting out of sensual desire, of aversion, of indolence, of anxiety, and of doubt. When will the jhana come? Well, see, that's right there is you acting out of restlessness again. If you don't keep not to get rid of it, but if you don't keep perspective in regard to that thought, and you don't include it within the same other stuff, and you start to give it some gratuitous priority, that's why you won't be getting the jhana. So you see, at no point would it ever be useful to ask or think in terms of when.
Or what, actually, even.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing, like there is no, because that will always kind of come with something, like whatever, some thought, some idea, some notion that this is the priority, or this is like the thing that is kind of justifiable to focus on it, to think about it, to worry about it, to have some kind of pressure in regard to it, like whatever, because it's about the first jhana. When will it come? Because it's not now,
and that
like,
one is wholesome,
and
that
that
one's
okay,
supposedly,
and that one's okay, exactly.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
like, I factually did something bad in the past, now therefore it's kind of justified
yeah.
to worry about it. It's not, because it's rooted in the pressure. It doesn't matter what it is. And that's why it's like, even in these these early verses and so on, where he's somebody's saying, I see the pure, the highest freedom from disease and so on, like, and then he's kind of criticizing him for resting on that thing that he has seen. He's not denying that, well, no, because you just saw some kind of low thing and there's actually something much higher. It's like, doesn't matter how high or how pure the thing he saw was, the attitude of resting on it, like taking it for granted, leaning on it, finding safety in it, that's what the problem always is. So that's kind of another thing where you would be kind of they would have to go together, basically. Like, if it's about this thing arising, it doesn't matter whether it's seen, heard, thought, cognized, it has to arise in time. So that would be like the other, I suppose, way you could use that as a measure. Like if your mind is resting on something.
Even the hope that, if I just stick to this practice long enough, the jhana will come, or enlightenment will come.
Yeah, enlightenment will come.
And what is that? Well, that's cognized.
Exactly.
That's cognized as well.
And that's an idea. Yeah.
And then you sort of you question everything else, like everything else. You don't welcome, you don't delight in, but that one's fine.
Yeah.
So that's the only reason why. And then it doesn't mean, of course, that you don't make effort, like because we're saying, okay, don't worry about what's going to happen later. No, it's you realize you have to make the effort, but the effort is always now, and expectations have to be included within that effort. So you have like a compulsion to wonder about when will I get the right view, or when will I finally be able to clear myself from the defilements. But see, you deal with it, or you get closer, not by following that line of thought, but by right now, not gratuitously forgiving or giving space for that to continue. And you're doing the work now. Like, so by abandoning expectations for enlightenment, having already purified the coarser stuff, of course, that's how you're actually getting closer. It doesn't, again, you shouldn't be confused with these common views like, oh, there's nothing to be attained, or Sotapatti is Srimantri is just another becoming. No, like you should be aiming for it, but you should understand how it is that you. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's also why, like this, it's something that's said often, like that what needs to be understood is you can't own things even if you want to. I think just by virtue of like hearing that quite often, you can forget the significance or like of it. And really the point is like, why do you say you can't own things even if you want to? And the point is that, when you're hearing that, it's because you want to kind of, I want to see how this is not mine. That's like the attitude of somebody, who wants to practice. I want to not own it, and it's you wanting to not own it that's kind of preventing you from seeing
that you
can't own it.
Yeah.
So like that's the point, like including that even in just being properly aware of it. Then that's the other thing I was going to say, like, because you can sort of then after the effect say, okay, yeah, I shouldn't do that and I shouldn't act out of it, but ultimately we'll have to kind of come down to recognizing that desire or that craving while it's there, and that in and of itself would literally cancel it out. That's why, like in that sutta, like it said in the beginning, somebody sees, he feels the sight, and there is passion for sights internally. So he sees there is passion for sights internally in me. And then in the second part it says he feels the sight and there is no passion for the sights internally. And there's a lot of the suttas carry the same principle. So it kind of sounds like these kind of, it's sort of talking about two different people on two different occasions. Yeah. Okay, one feels the sight for the passion and he knows that there's passion for sights internally. And then later on a different occasion, somebody else feels the sight but no passion. Whereas actually it's almost like, I would say it's describing the same thing from two different perspectives. In other words, like the person who upon recognizing there is passion for sights internally, immediately switches it to there is no passion for sights internally, because that passion cannot exist in the environment of
there's no ignorance,
knowledge, where there's no ignorance. So it's like knowing it is the abandonment of it.
I mentioned it a few times already, but the thing is, it's probably easily overlooked. Like, and that's one of those things that clicks only later. You heard it a million times. No, craving is not there by itself. Craving is only there when there is ignorance. And every Buddhist would say, oh yeah, of course. But no, like factually, when you're trying to get rid of stuff, it's the usual way of practicing, you carry the implication that the craving is sort of like primordial and it's there on its own.
Yeah.
But actually, no, like the craving is there to the extent that the ignorance is there. But if you overlook, if you don't put things in the right order, basically, you won't be actually dealing with. So really, you're going to be dealing with the symptoms of craving. Now, it doesn't matter how much you think you're dealing with the actual craving. So that's a difficult thing. Like it doesn't give that immediate satisfaction that you expect.
I was thinking maybe one way to understand that practically, or at least to kind of get an idea of it, is that like if you think of craving as a thing, something else that I have to deal with, it's not, that's not going to be it. That's going to be a symptom of it. It's basically the closest thing you can find to your point of view. It's right where you are. Like what's the closest thing to you would be where you would find your craving.
And that can only be revealed not by trying to figure it out, but by if you have removed these more subtle layers. Like there's always going to be a layer that you can see, as I've repeated multiple times. So that's the layer where you work on. Removing that layer is what's going to make the next layer apparent. Then removing that layer is going to make. But if you're here and then you're trying to figure it out, like, okay, so what is it that is preventing anagami from becoming arahant, and then you're like down here, that's not going to work. So and then the related to what you said about craving, that's exactly what I just mentioned, that it delights here and there. It has nothing to do with what it is. It's the principle of like taking things up wherever it can. So if for as long as you think that the craving is this object, by definition you're not seeing craving, or this feeling or whatever. It simply cannot be something specific. So all of that is like would be recognized by first, as we talked about before, seeing the signs of the mind and learning what yoniso-manasikara is and so on. But so actually the sutta, it's good that you brought that up, because it does sound, and the first time I read it, I do remember I thought like, okay, yeah, this is talking about two different people or something. But no, like the sutta itself is saying the Dhamma is timeless.
Exactly.
And is using that to explain how the Dhamma is timeless. So it's basically saying, without any time involved, a person can go from there being passion eternally to there being no passion eternally. And it's not because, it's not that they couldn't do it because they haven't been practicing long enough. That's not the primary cause. They couldn't do it because they didn't know how to do it. So that's why, like, from the very beginning, everyone can be free from greed, aversion, and delusion. It's not, there's nothing blocking that, like a magical sort of energy that you clear out through the practice. It is always...
the only thing that's blocking it is greed, aversion, and delusion.
Yeah. And it feeds itself, obviously. So greed, aversion, delusion feeds ignorance. Ignorance feeds greed, aversion, delusion. So basically, like, you could be an arahant today if you just understand fully how not to have passion internally. That there's nothing like that there is no reason why you have to why time has to pass. Practically it will, so don't be expecting like I can get enlightened overnight. But if you understand it that way, you will actually see it is always fully your responsibility. Nothing can come, and that's why nothing can come in between it, because see, that's the thing. If craving, if freedom from craving, freedom from ignorance, all these things actually required time, or had anything to do with time, once you achieved it, there will be no guarantee that it won't come back. Like once you achieve the freedom from it, there will be no guarantee that it won't come back, because it meant that it was basically like external to you, imposed on you. And then if you were free from it, that would be basically circumstantial, even if it lasts.
It was something that happened to you.
Yeah, exactly. So something that happened to you, something that that just came, to sort of replace the stuff that was there before. But no, because it is fully based on understanding. Like, can you forget something when you were assuming something, and then you know the actual nature of it? How can you ever forget? Like, you can forget specific things. You can forget, where a certain place lies in a map or something. But that fundamental knowledge is something that, well, it pertains to the nature of your very experience. So for as long as experience is there, you won't be able to forget it, because every single phenomenon involves that same nature. So you basically, it's impossible for you to forget for as long as you're alive. So that's in opposition to something that just happens. Even if it's supposedly through your effort and your years of practice, the fact that you still thought of it as, okay, yeah, time after this 20 years, like, if you still have the view, no, all of this effort was necessary to bring me to this point, because it was like loading up this meter or something, that means you don't see it on the right level. You think you're basically just dealing with circumstances. It should be like, when you're free from it, you see, if from day one I would have known this, I would have been free from day one. That time was, strictly speaking, it was like necessary, because ignorance is beginningless, but it's not intrinsic to the process of purification. That's why, like, Bahia and stuff, he went from Putujana to Arahant in basically a moment.
Maybe you could even get a glimpse of that on the level of, bring it back down to, like, even just the level of keeping the precepts again. Because, keeping the precepts, in a way, I think it can often sound like, okay, yeah, this is something you now have to, like, do and take on. But even somebody who is completely unrestrained, like, do you spend more time breaking the precepts or not breaking the precepts? Well, actually, I spend much more time not breaking the precepts. So all I have to do is, on certain very specific occasions, not make choices that I would have made in the past. And I realize I find myself already in a state that was kind of already there under my feet, in a way. Like, I was just not in it because of kind of going out of your way in a way. And I suppose, like, from the point of view of somebody who is habitually breaking the precepts and not keeping the virtue, that is what kind of feels like the natural state. Automatic. It feels automatic, feels effortless. But you realize, actually, well, which kind of is more complicated, basically? Is it more complicated to, like, go out of my way, misrepresent the truth, tell a lie? Is it more complicated to have to, steal something from somebody else, kill, whatever? It's more complicated, to put it in that way, or it involves more effort than not doing these things, and you were already spending more time having more of your life in the state of not breaking the precepts. So it's more like, just to kind of, well, you would realize, I suppose, once you'd developed this, that you actually were just developing something that was already kind of there in a nascent form, and that you could have accessed, that you could have always accessed. That's the point. It was not something that you had to go out and, like, seek and gain.
So it's not like let's say, a pilot. Like, factually, it is impossible that someone has never driven a plane before, and he just gets in. Somebody tells him something, and he does it perfectly. Because that's a mundane skill. And that's why treating the Dhamma as a skill is extremely misguided. It's like, no, it's from day one. If your own, as the Buddha said, dust in your eyes was not there, this would have been obvious. There was, like, the time, really, you could say, that's the best way to put it. The time, seeing it didn't require time. what required time was taking off the dust in your eyes that prevented you from seeing what was already there the whole time.